it's great to see so many faces here this evening. And I want to make it very clear that I'm speaking on behalf not just of myself, but of my partner, David Marks, who was very much involved in all aspects of the design, and all the other architects and engineers who are involved. And it just, I was very pleased that Mark could join us, because I think as architects we need to acknowledge the fact that, when we design a building, we're not designing it on our own, we're designing it with engineers. And it's fantastic that Saisha's come as well to actually give the perspective of the user. So hopefully it'll be a really well-rounded evening. So Cambridge in 2009 was, like many cities in the UK, had a very fast-growing Muslim community, and with and a very diverse and community. Over 60 different countries they think were represented, and the Islamic Trust decided to build a mosque and bought a site in southeast Cambridge, sorry. And unlike Oxford, it didn't have a purpose-built mosque. And so they organised a competition in 2009, and we were lucky enough to win it. And this is a photograph, I think, that says very well the need for the mosque. This was the old mosque that was so popular that it was coming out onto the street. And so, it was clear that there was a great need for the mosque in Cambridge. Our client brief was for a 1,000 worshipper mosque. And the ethos of the mosque was that it should be truly universal. And in the sense that they involved in the competition, they involved local community, non-Muslim and Muslim, in the choosing of the architect. So right from the beginning, there was a real dedication to including the local community. And they wanted it to integrate into the wider community, and this is one of the ways they did it. And they wanted it to respect the local area. But another really important point right from the beginning for both ourselves and for the client was that it should be very highly sustainable. Dr. Timothy Winter, who was one of the main representatives of the client body, said a minimal carbon footprint is required to emphasize spiritual beliefs in humanity's role as a humble and responsible custodian of creation. So it was very much part of the ethos right from the beginning. But they also, the idea was that it should also be a positive civic asset to Cambridge. So the site was on Mill Road, as I said, in the southeast of Cambridge. And it was a brownfield site surrounded by a residential area. And these are the kind of houses that were in the area. The typical Cambridge Galt brick with highlights in red brick. So this was the context of the new mosque for 1,000 worshippers. And of course, we hadn't actually designed a mosque before, so of course we did a lot of research. And one of the things that we found was that mosques throughout the world and throughout the centuries tended to take on the culture and vernacular of their area and time, of the space and time. So when you look at a mosque in China, it looks very different from an Arabian mosque. It looks very different from an Indian mosque. And so we asked ourselves, what should a British mosque be in the 21st century? And that was our kind of starting point that we used. But we wanted it to be very contemporary, but also to fit within the context of Cambridge, as well as being, and the cultural context of being an Islamic building. So we took inspiration from the local sacred architecture, of course, King's College Chapel, and in particular fan vaulting, which we discovered is English.
it's uniquely English. Fan vaulting is English. It's not actually part of a Gothic tradition that goes elsewhere. And of course, we looked at many mosques throughout the world, but these are just two. Of course, Cordoba in Spain, and this is a Turkish mosque built in timber. And so another starting point was the Garden of Paradise. So this was an image that was very inspirational to us, with its central water feature that represents the source of all life in Islam. It's very important to have water as part of it. And the idea emerged of a calm oasis, very much a glade of trees and a calm oasis. And so there you can see on the top left a glade of trees, and then these trees morphed into the structural trees out of timber, and then they were joined at the top, and then with I shouldn't look at the screen. And then they were the structure was then entirely timber, and then the cladding was then on the outside of the timber. So we involved, right from the beginning, a professor that we'd had at the Architectural Association, Professor Keith Critchlow, who is an expert in sacred geometry and Islamic architecture. And he's a geometer. He draws only in very, very sharp pencil. And he established the underlying geometry of the whole building, because geometry in Islam is the representation of, there is no physical representation of objects in Islam. So geometry is a representation of nature and a spiritual representation of objects. And so Keith came up with the idea of using the breadth of the compassionate pattern as being the underlying pattern, which is made up of star octagons, which is two squares rotated, one passive, one active. And that is the underlying geometry of the whole building. And then we took this underlying geometry and we obviously translated it into our 3D computer mechanisms, and then pulled it up to form the trees. I mean, this is obviously a drawing of the kind of end result, if you like. I mean, there were many options that we went through before we actually came to the final option of the design. And this was a model that we did just before planning to show the final design. And I'll talk a bit about this later, but we involved Bloomer Lehman, who were the timber manufacturers at the very early stage. Because if you're going to do something unusual, you need to talk to the people who are going to make it, to make sure that it's going to be cost effective, that it's going to be possible to make it, and it's a kind of collaborative design process with them, and that's exactly what it was. So this is the plan, and you can see Mill Road on the left, it is a journey that people take from the everyday and the mundane through a series of spaces to the more spiritual and contemplative area of the prayer hall. So if you start with Mill Road, there's a community garden. In fact, there was a community garden on the site, just outside the site, a small one. So we extended that. So that's outside the wall of the mosque. And then inside that is an Islamic garden designed by Emma Clark, who, on similar principles of trying to bring together English and Islamic principles together in a garden where they were combined. Then pass through that to a portico, which is outside but covered, and then through to an atrium, which is very much a gathering space. The orange, and either side of that there's a teaching area on the top and a cafe below, And this is the area where people take off their shoes, but it's also where weddings happen now, and conferences and lectures, and it's very much the social heart of the building. But then people move through to the lobby, and on either side of there's the ablution areas. On the left is the women's ablutions, and on the right the men's ablutions. And then people will move through to the actual prayer hall. And the reason why the prayer hall is at a slight angle is that the Qibla Wall is facing Mecca. So this is the Qibla Wall. And I think one of the things we learned is that, or we were told anyway by our client, is that the Qibla Wall is the only really fixed thing that you need to have in a mosque. You know, people ask, why haven't we got a minaret? You know, but apparently the Qibla Wall is the really key element that you need, and obviously that is why it is at a slight angle. And then, you know, the way the building sits, you know, the idea was that it should be very comfortable in its surroundings. So where it meets the Mill Road, it is parallel to Mill Road, but also quite low. So, you know, of the kind of scale of the surrounding residential buildings. And then is a much lower area where the ablution areas are, and that's where a lot of the plant is that Mark will tell us about in a bit. And then, of course, to the prayer hall, which has a real height to it, but it's set back, so it really doesn't dominate the area. So there, I think you can see. This is another model we made during planning. You can see that it just is much lower at the front, and then it steps up at the back to this the main prayer space.
I think the roofscape really embraces the environmental strategies we're trying to employ, so which I'll talk about in a minute, but it might look a bit odd that you've got these things popping up, but we can go into that. But it really embraces what we're trying to do in terms of passive design.
Yeah. And the other thing that the building has is two flats, one for the imam, and which is on the one side, and then another flat on the other side for visiting scholars and professors. So this is the section. I mean, Mark will kind of talk about it in detail, but I was just going to say that before you start, that, you know, one of the things that we had to have was a car park. It is a building for 1,000 worshippers, so in the planning it was made very clear to us that that's one thing that we wouldn't get planning unless we had that. And so, you know, we did travel plans as well, and I think the mosque is is trying to kind of keep down car use, but it was something that we had to have. And there you can see again the stepping down to Mill Road, which is over here. And then Mark's going to talk about the natural light and ventilation.
And just to say, there is quite a lot of electric car charging as well. So.
Yeah.
So obviously, from our Skelly Couch, fantastic project to be involved with. Clearly, from the outset, which we really needed to integrate with architecture, and that's definitely how we like to work. And we've worked with Barfield before on other schemes, and they have a similar mindset. So it's about working together from a very early stage and making the building do as much work as possible, and trying to eliminate mechanical and electrical installations as far as possible. They are needed, of course. So, I mean, looking at the section, I mean, initially when we were involved, and we do lots of theatres, lots of high-density spaces in terms of people, we kind of thought maybe it needs a mechanical solution, and maybe we could use the sort of concrete mass of the basement. But then we had a bit of a pause and a rethink, and, you know, the prayer hall is very sporadic use, and actually you don't need mechanical for most of the time. It's a huge volume anyway. So then we started to think, well, hang on, we've got all these roof lights of amazing daylight. Let's make it as passive as possible and go completely natural ventilation. So that's what we've done, and it took quite a while of convincing ourselves and the client that it would work, because, you know, 1,000 people particularly during Ramadan, it's a lot of heat, and how can we make it work? There's lots of other passive features, so maybe go to the next one.
Well, and of course it's fabric first, approach,
Yeah.
so highly insulated and fabric in the first place, and with no cold bridges and no leaky air.
Yeah. So I mean, I suppose that is the starting point really, because of the structure. The walls are 300 millimetres of insulation, way ahead of its standards, and probably still is. Air leakage was less than half an air change an hour. These are the features, I suppose. Most of them passive, which you can talked about already. Rainwater harvesting, toilets, and then
and the garden.
daylighting and the garden.
Yeah.
Daylighting, no gas on site, all electric. And so bearing in mind this was designed probably 5 years ago, at least.
What? No, 10.
10. Well,
2010, I suppose.
yeah, I suppose the final when
Yeah.
it was starting
Yeah.
construction. But yeah,
Oh, yeah,
we said no gas.
Yeah.
So that was a very key thing. Obviously the gardens, which help with microclimate, and then we can talk through some of the features. Obviously I need to get an M&E drawing in here.
Yes.
I'm an M&E engineer. But this is in the basement, and this is where all the kit is, I suppose. Go to the next slide. Okay, so the task was really to have minimal amount of direct sunlight into the prayer hall, but amazing daylight. Also trying to minimise solar gains. So we went through lots of studies in terms of how this roof light configuration could work. Let as much daylight as possible, but little direct sunlight. But also, how could we use that? How could we use that for natural ventilation? So we joined, obviously, with Barfield, come up with this design where you've got effectively a glass lid, a drum, which also acts for acoustic absorption, and that effectively cuts off a lot of the direct sunlight, but allows lots of natural light into the space. And also we're using it for a natural ventilation exhaust bath. And so we did lots of calculations and lots of modelling, which we do, that's our thing. So daylight results, and then this is kind of a crude render, I suppose, but the daylight in the space is fantastic. You really don't need the natural artificial lights on at all, and it's a really nice quality of light. It's not very glary at all. And obviously we're making use of the roof lights for ventilation.
I mean, what we said to ourselves was that we didn't want to have to put on a light in the day in any of the public spaces. So that's kind of what we said was going to be our aim. And in that first year when I went to the mosque, I kept on saying, "Turn off the lights. You don't need them." And it's true. I mean, in most places you don't actually need them, but you can confirm that, or not.
So I mean, the daylight factor is about sort of 3-ish on an overcast day. So
Yeah.
this is very technical, but so then our next challenge was natural ventilation. Lots of people in the space, how is it going to feel? And really it's trying to explain to the client, well actually it's probably okay to be at 26 degrees as long as you've got lots of air moving over you. And so these are diagrams to show that it might be a bit hotter, but you can still be satisfied with lots of air movement. So then we built another model, as I said we like doing that, to do some CFD on the space. So these little bars are effectively people, and that's 1,000 people in the space. And then we do some CFD modelling to actually model the airflow through the space and actually see what the airflow will be like and the temperature. And here's a diagram of that. So this really is showing that from the people being there actually helps move the air because they get hot and air moves up and you get increases of velocity and in theory increases comfort. So the results were pretty much as we expected, but it was good to do a lot to prove, especially on such a building. So how do we get all that to work? We get it to fit into the actual space and not look absolutely awful. Well, again, working closely with the architects. So these are not your normal grills you would see. This isn't like a louver type thing. And so it was really, what's the free area of this? Is it going to work? And then behind that, we've got a damper assembly which lets the air through into the space, and same on the outside. Next.
So these were designed by Keith Critchlow. He did all of the the geometry and the kind of artwork. I mean, it's one of Cambridge planners actually require artwork to be integrated into the buildings, or build civic buildings like this. And we didn't want an artist to come in at the end and just put something on the front, or in the garden or whatever. So that's why we involved, I should have said that earlier, that's why we involved Keith right from the beginning, so that the art is kind of integrated, if you call it art, it's integrated into the architecture from the beginning.
And they all lift off as well, so you can get to the bits that you don't need to. And then, of course, usual energy modelling, and it performed very well. And really, I suppose the message on this is that we just need to make sure those targets are realised, which hopefully we're going to be able to do. Next. There's the PVs on the roof, and there's the air source heat pumps going in. So that was a bit of a challenge getting them in there, but it all worked with neighbours nearby and noise. Everyone was about noise with air source heat pumps, but it all works very well. And then monitoring. So just after construction, we spent quite a bit of time, checking, does it work? So we were looking at the BMS, and so this was a very, very hot day, I think. So there we go, June 2019, and the prayer hall was actually quite a bit cooler than outside. I think it was sort of up at 30 degrees, and inside was actually less than that. And then here, just checking that the fresh air moving into the space was working, and that's CO2 levels, and then the bottom one is how much the sort of ventilation's working, and you can see as it works, which up here, you can see the CO2 levels reducing quite a lot.
Okay, so then kind of coming back to, I mentioned that we talked to a company who, the timber manufacturers, Bloomer Lehman, right from the beginning. You've got that in your eye, haven't you? And this was David, my partner. He did a lot of research to find the right company for who would be able to manufacture the timber, and Bloomer Lehman came out on top. And I like to use this slide because I went to visit the factory, and it's completely self-sufficient. So it's a factory that it's powered by their own timber, or their own timber waste, and they are a fantastic company. This is one of their working drawings. I think it's probably one of the most beautiful working drawings that I've ever seen, and you can see every single element and every single half joint that is needed. And so each colour represents a different piece of the structure, so you can see there's quite a bit of repetition in there. So this is the half joints, one of the half joints that the kind of complexity of it is extraordinary. And then this is kind of, and you must remember that they actually made all of the elements from very thin lamellas, and so this is two different types. So the on the far left is just straight pieces, and they're obviously a bit like a club sandwich, and even when a piece is curved in one direction, it's still a sandwich. But when a piece curves in two directions, and it's actually taking more structural load, that it actually becomes like a Battenberg cake. So it's actually, much, they're actually making all of the structural elements from scratch to do what the structural job that they need to do. A bit like a spider's web. Spiders do that too. All of the pieces of a spider's web have different structural properties. And this is just showing some of the pieces and the machinery that they had to, very sophisticated machinery with 5 degrees of freedom. And then all the pieces came to site on the back of lorries, and they built a jig on site and constructed the domes on site. And this is lifting one of them up and then fitting them together. And there was some trepidation with the main contractor, Gilbert Ash, at first, because they had another timber manufacturer that they preferred to use, and so there was some trepidation. But at the end, the guy on site, who this was his last job, he retired after that. He said that they were the best subcontractor that he'd ever worked with, because they were on time, they kept the program, and it was the precision of this timber is extraordinary. You can see how they're just fitting it all in place. And this is just a reminder that the entire structure of the mosque above ground is timber, and then onto that is brick cladding, and it was designed so. We decided to use the colour of the Galt brick with the highlights in red, and actually develop a kind of Kufic pattern. And there, Keith and one of his students helped with this, helped develop the Kufic pattern. And it actually reads, "Say He is God, the One." These elements here read, "Say He is God, the One." So that's integrated into the wall of the mosque. And the method of construction is, it's a bit similar to a kind of vernacular that you find in Sussex. It's a bit like mathematical tiles, where you've got a timber structure that moves, and then you have tiles that are kind of pinned onto the timber structure. And this is a house in Lewes where you can see this is, they're both mathematical tiles. So this is the kind of technology, the kind of modern technology that's used. I mean, there's questions about the use of metal and, embodied carbon, and, no doubt we can talk about that. But this is the overall effect of the brickwork. And this is a design, again, done by Keith Critchlow, of the doors, the main doors to the mosque. And this is just some slides that take you through the journey. So the community garden on the outside at different times of year. And then this is the Islamic Garden designed by Emma Clark at different times of the year. As I say, it includes both Islamic and kind of British or English garden principles. And this is the Central Mosque. Sadly, in that photograph, the fountain's not actually going, but it does work most of the time. And this is the portico that you pass through, and the atrium, which is the space where everyone gathers, takes off their shoes. And as I said, that's where the weddings take place. And this is the main atrium space without people. And then you come through the lobby. That's just looking back, actually, into the atrium space. And this is the ablution, the two ablutions. So on the left-hand side is the women's ablution. On the right-hand side is the men's ablution. We found these very beautiful turquoise tiles that just to pick up the main ablution area. And in the women's ablution area, it's the only space in the building that's actually an octagon, even though the underlying geometry of the building is based on octagons. And this is the prayer hall, the main prayer space, with the dome orientated towards the Qibla Wall. You can see on the left-hand side there's the women's area with the mashrabiyah screen with a gap, and beyond that there's an area where women and children can be with acoustics acoustically separate. And then on the first floor, there's another area where women can go. And I'm sure Saisha can talk about this more, but it's regarded as one of the most women-friendly mosques in the country. So this is, again, at the prayer hall with the dome. And this is the prayer hall during COVID, so where everyone had to be slightly separate. The calligraphy was done in Turkey. That was added later. And this is a view from the women's area with the gap and to the mihrab and mimbar. And we've done, since we finished it, we've tried to do the embodied carbon calculations on the building. This is the embodied carbon, the best case scenario, this, taking into account sequestration of the timber. And it's just interesting to see the amount that the rebar counts. That's always more than people think. We took into account the flights as well, because our contractor came from Northern Ireland, and so there was quite a lot of flying. But in the greater scheme of things, it wasn't that huge. And then this is the embodied carbon if you don't take into account the sequestration. So it goes from 500 and 550 more or less to 850. But you have to bear in mind that this building was designed in 2010.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd have to say is that those calculations are very, very honest, and it includes everything. Because there's lots of tools out there which
yes.
you can one click, for example, and it doesn't include flights and stuff like that. So I think
it
was
includes everything.
very good for when it was done.
And yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, and it was really, amazing to hear about quite how, how coordinated, how clearly working together you were with the M&E and the architecture. That was actually really exciting. So I don't know if it was for you, but
and for us.
I did feel that there were a couple of things we should pick up on there. If anyone's got any burning questions, I could take one or two, but otherwise I'm going to do them. The first of all was whether you're checking your targets as you go. You're checking how things are performing. So you're continuing to do that, are you?
We want to. We just need more evidence, really, more data from site. So
from science?
No, from site. So we've lost our connection to the BMS, but it will be reinstated soon. And we will be updating on that.
So in a year's time, we can hear.
A good few months after completion, and we should soon have that connection back and we'll get some more data.
Yeah. And we'll hear from Saisha in a moment. And when we do, it would be really good to hear whether you managed to get through the day without lights being turned on. That would be exciting to hear. Are there any burning questions for now? Oh, yes. We've got a mic. Could you please speak into the mic so that it's captured for the online recording? And could you just say who you are and where you're from, if you've got a place that you're from?
Hi, Carol Bell from Surrey County Council in the development team. I wanted to know how you got on with the planners, how you did your public engagement, and what the local residents thought when they were told they were going to have a mosque in their vicinity.
Yes, well, good question. But as I mentioned before, we have a very intelligent client. He's a professor at the university, and he actually included the local people, even in choosing the architect. So, there was never any question of the local community, non-Muslim as well as Muslim, being excluded from the process. It was all very, very open. And, during the consultation, we had many, many meetings with local people as well. And that was one of the things. I mean, you probably know parking is one of the kind of key issues that local residents are worried about. And the fact that it was going to be 1,000 worshippers, did worry some people. And the fact that we had a car park did waylay a lot of those worries. But it was also, I think, the fact that our client is English. I mean, I think that, I can say that, but it's, he's a kind of cultural bridge in himself. And so I think that really helps. So he's converted to Islam, and but he's a professor at the university. So I think that...
Just tell us what the site was beforehand.
The site was a brownfield site. It was a warehouse. It was a John Lewis warehouse.
So it's quite a big jump.
Yeah, it was a big jump, yes, absolutely. No, It was a very big jump.
I'm guessing you may be facing some similar issues, particularly with the mosque or with other buildings.
Much smaller projects, but still, if it's in a residential area, no matter what it is, even if it's more residential, people can get very, very aerated about what it's going to look like. I wanted to know what the planners thought of the design aspect, because again, you know, you talked about it being using the local brick and the local design and so on, but all of the, for want of a better way of putting it, Islamic and rather beautiful, I think, elements that you added to it. One of the things which I come across with local planners is they want it to look like what's already there, and I think, well, that's 1970s housing, you know. Can we do something that's a bit more adventurous, please?
Yes, I mean, you know, I think, you know, as in, you know, I think one of the first things you're taught as an architect is powers of persuasion, and you have to, you know, develop those in spades. But also you have to listen. You know, I think, you know, we did the London Eye, and I think one of the things that we learned doing that project is actually that's how important it is to listen to local people. So, you know, we did a lot of consultation on that. So we learned, you know, we take it really seriously. I mean, you know, you can actually get a lot of local intelligence from local people, and you have to kind of go with that attitude. You know, that you're not just telling them, you're actually learning from them as well, because it's their areas where they live. So,
one more quick fire question, because we're going to have another chance to ask questions in a minute. Was there somebody just behind? Yes.
Thank you so much.
Could you just say who you are?
Oh yeah, of course. Rim Kalsoom, one of the founders of Muslim Women in Architecture and a lecturer at the University of Westminster. I wanted to know more about the kind of process that you took in terms of speaking to...
Can I just jump in? Because I think we're going to ask Saisha to talk about that in a
sure.
moment. So I think once you've finished your question, we will come back to Saisha and I'll introduce her, and then she will talk to that question, and then we'll come back to Julia if necessary at the end.
Of course, yeah. Should I finish the question?
Yes,
or?
sorry, you should
No,
finish the question.
I think the question is quite, you know, you've kind of figured it out, but the process of working with Muslim women and the community to kind of figure out, you know, just to know a bit more about how you went about it to finally end up with the design that you ended up with. Thanks.
Sorry for your interruption. Saisha first got involved with Cambridge Mosque, working as a volunteer, I believe, in 2019, and she's now admin manager. And she says she wears many hats, from managing tours, so those of us who will be heading there for a tour or who've already been there, to planning events and project management. When pushed, Saisha would say that her favourite hat is anything that involves engaging the community. So perfectly speaking to the last question before that as well. So here to tell us about the mosque with the community is Saisha.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, yes, I have to do that, sorry. Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for having me, and Julie for inviting me. It's a real honour to be here to speak to you all. I'd just like to touch on just 3 points. Mainly the impact of having a purpose-built mosque and what that has had on the community. Secondly, what actually happens at a mosque. Many people might not know, might sound strange to say we have weddings and functions as well. And then thirdly, how it truly bridges communities together. So first of all, the impact of a purpose-built space. I think the fact that Cambridge Central Mosque, as I think someone already touched on, was purpose-built. There was an opportunity to consider so many sort of factors, so many people within the community. Definitely has a very positive impact on its surrounding area and also the community itself. One of the things that we have is obviously our Islamic Garden, the community garden that Julia mentioned. It's a really great space that people use, not only people who come to visit the mosque, but also the local community. So a lot of the neighbours sort of use it as a local garden just to come take some rest. It's so stunning throughout the year. I think, Julia, the picture you had of the tulips is actually what it is looking like at the moment. So it's really nice that you had that in there. So we've got a range of different sort of seasons. So it's a space where people come just to sort of relax throughout the day. Worshippers as well, when they're visiting from families far away, it's a nice place for them to visit too. In addition to that, we have an exhibition space, which is the teaching room that Julia mentioned. It's a multifunctional room. So there we have many community functions, from weddings to conferences. The exhibition is one that is currently on Islamic contributions to science and technology. So that's been there for a few months now, and it's still there actually at the moment. So if anyone wants to pop down to visit, you can. And also to the right of the screen, if I got my right, is the cafe, sort of in full swing. So The cafeteria is sort of in its first phases. At the moment, it's sort of self-operated, but with hopes in the future that it will become a full-fledged cafe. So at the moment, it's really nice that sort of students use it to come and study. A lot of people who are working from home now are using it just to come throughout the day. As you can see as well, the gorgeous natural light, no lights in the pictures as well. So it shows how much light comes in through the building. I think what wasn't touched on was sort of the glass at the front of the building. So not only does that capture a lot of heat, also it allows for a lot of natural light, which goes all across the front of the building. Touching on a point that's actually quite relevant, I have to just thank a good friend of mine, Amelia Hallsworth, for her pictures, who's here today. So thank you for letting me use them. So this is the women's section of the prayer hall. I think as well, we touched on just before, one thing that makes the space so significant and the fact that it was purpose-built was considering heavily women's involvement in the space. Sort of growing up, you wouldn't really find that there was a lot of space for women in mosques, especially sort of women with young children. So I think one thing that the mosque, our mosque does fantastically and was incorporated in the design is having a space for women. So growing up, I mean, you wouldn't really go to a mosque actually as a woman. I think if you did, it'd sort of be in a corner, like they're saying up front, sort of pushed away in the stairs. I think that picture that we had of Abu Bakr Mosque before, there was a small little wooden door. I don't know if anyone remembers on the picture. That was actually the women's entrance. So another amazing thing about the mosque is that women and men enter through the same space. So I think that's also just, as a female Muslim, I think knowing that you can just enter into a space as an equal, you know, that's something that's really significant and really beautiful about the building too. So it's actually part of the main prayer hall, the women's section. It's separated by, I can't think of the word for it now. Yes, which is actually deliberately designed, I think Julia, correct me if I'm, at different heights. So it's something that was asked to the local community, you know, as women, what would you like in terms of a partition? Would you like one that sort of covers you full head to toe, waist level? Would you like no partition at all? So I think the screen was designed with that in mind and caters to all three, which is great. And they're actually movable as well. So if we have more women that come, for instance, for an event, and removable, yes, and removable, yes. So that's also great as well. The picture at the top is the mother and child room, which is a soundproof room as well, which is brilliant. I think as well with a lot of mothers who come with young children, they just have a nice space to be in, sort of not have to worry about children sort of causing any disturbances to the prayer. There's also a very gorgeous mihrab for the women's section as well there, which is, I think, quite often the most favourite spot for men and women when they visit. And then just up the stairs is the gallery prayer hall, which you saw the view of before. So again, another dedicated space just for women, and they have a choice, you know, which areas they would like to pray in. And as Tim Winter always says, the women have the best view as well. Another sort of element of the building is more so the community side. So we have a lot of different community events that take place. On the left was a workshop that was organised by the local hospital with a charity called Rosie Maternity Voices. So they ran a workshop basically giving voices to mothers of sort of ethnic backgrounds, and they could speak to practitioners in person just to hear feedback. So I think you wouldn't really find a space, I think, a mosque maybe in the UK that does these kinds of events. So I think another thing that is attracting people to us is you know, it's cross-cultural design, and also what it's intended to be is a bridge between communities. From the top we have some goodies from our Macmillan baking event that we did, and also a very recent new pop-up library that's running every month for children as well. Also, we this year or last year now, we ran a COVID vaccine clinic. So just again highlighting how intrinsically involved in the community the mosque is as well. We also do a lot of sort of community welfare projects. So this is from a food distribution that we did, sort of helping vulnerable people. COVID obviously had a big impact on the community in terms of just basic household food. So we've done about 3 or 4 distributions now, partnering up with quite big charities in the UK, and also helping sort of our local neighbours. So right next to us there's a cafe, the Edge Cafe, which is also a local food hub. So we're able to support them as well, which is great. Just to go back a little bit, another sort of touching on sort of the purpose-built nature of the mosque, the fact that the car park is there as well was a huge factor in the design, and I think is something practically that the community use very thoroughly. Even on Fridays, actually, it does get full, but throughout the day, there's sort of no disturbances to the local community, which was a big factor for previous mosques in the area, which are all sort of converted houses, and they're on sort of main street roads with a lot of residential streets and a lot of shops and such as well. So having the car park definitely helps in that sense as well. Moving on to our tours. So this is just a bit about sort of what happens at the mosque. So we range from a group called the Purple Jacket and Redhead Ladies, I think they were called, it's quite obvious, to the conference room, which was hired out by the local council for just their sort of annual meetings, sort of to weddings as well. And then I just wanted to show a short clip just to really highlight the community sort of events that take place.
Here we are today at Cambridge Central Mosque. We are having a Diabetes Wellness Day. We've invited all our diabetic patients, those that are pre-diabetic, their families, their carers, and we've got various events going on throughout the day.
So it's great to hold events like this to raise awareness of conditions like diabetes, because we really want to try and engage the community and reaching out to those people that don't normally reach out to healthcare professionals, and to hold it in a community setting like this at Cambridge Central Mosque, one of the biggest community venues in Cambridge, is a fantastic way of engaging.
We've had various talks, we've got some screening in case you're worried if you're diabetic, we've got advice about food and exercise, we've got some checks going on.
There were so many different workshops on, different lectures, women's Tai Chi, men's Tai Chi, football, a massive range of people coming, not only Muslims. It was just altogether an amazing event to be at.
It's been very nice to come here, particularly as I live so nearby, and this event today has been very impressive. I've spoken to various of the specialists here, and the food has been lovely, so it's been a very nice day.
We really want patients and people with diabetes to be well informed about their condition, to know how to manage it, and to know what's important for them and the changes, if any, that they need to make in their life.
Oh, that wasn't meant to be a plug. Just at the end of the video. Yeah, so I just thought it'd be really nice just to share that was one of our most recent events that we did, and I think actually one of the larger scale ones. I don't know how to come off this screen, but you can also check out our YouTube channel. Okay, it's a bit too early, but I'll just go back. So yes, I think the Diabetes Wellness Day was one of the biggest events we had. We had a lot of sort of high organisations within the NHS who actually, I was actually able to present that video to a lot of sort of high authority figures from the NHS who were very sort of pleased and happy in seeing these events taking place in community locations. I think someone even said during the talk, which was right, I think Cambridge Central Mosque is actually is the biggest community space, community venue in Cambridge. And I think the last thing I just wanted to touch on was that essentially in terms of bringing communities together, right from sort of the outset to everyone who was involved in the project, how diverse the team was, to the users of the building. Tours are probably our most popular thing. I was just telling Julia, I think in May we have one every day booked now, so it's keeping us very busy. It's amazing to see the local community interact so well with us. I think as well there's a huge sense of pride. I think there's a question about how do local communities engage with the mosque and the fact that it is a mosque. I think even if I remember correctly, there was a lady who, when we were nominated for the Sterling Prize, commented on Twitter saying when the mosque first sort of was planned, she was against it, so vehemently against it. But now, sort of using the space and seeing it on her doorstep, she's become sort of one of its biggest supporters and fans. I think that speaks to sort of the project as a whole and what it represents. I think the fact that it bridges communities together. I mean, just from a day-to-day, just being there, opening sort of people's experiences and knowledge on Islam, for example. I think one story I always like to tell, and I said I wouldn't tell too many stories, so I'll end on this one, is that there was one woman who sort of was peering, a very old lady who was just sort of peering through the glass windows, and she was actually terrified to come into the mosque. And so I just sort of, when I was volunteering, my role was just to sort of welcome people, so I just spoke to her, I said, would you like to come inside? She said, oh, I don't know if I'm allowed to do that. So I said, no, you can. I spent about half an hour with her speaking to her, and she, slowly she broke her walls down, and she got a lot more comfortable. And she actually was so comfortable, she actually said to me, she said, oh, you know, you guys aren't that bad. so I think, although it was a bit hard to hear, but I think it really opened your eyes to the fact that, you know, there are sort of people who are still worried, you know, about mosques and places like this. And I think the fact that it's such a community building is incredible. And the fact that it's, you know, that you can have those experiences and then someone's viewpoint can change dramatically, I think is one of the great things about our mosque as well. Thank you.
I'm going to ask for some questions in a moment, but first of all, I think we should pick up on your question earlier and just ask, was the place of women in the mosque an important part of the brief?
It was well, for me personally, it was a very important part of the brief. But also, you know, for the client it was too. There was actually a survey done of all the women in the kind of Muslim community who were going to use it, just to ask what kind of spaces they wanted. And, you know, that's what led to having the space on the upper level for people who maybe have just come to England for the first time and they're used to just being completely separate. So that was the reason for having that. And then, you know, the women and children, although, you know, you could argue it should be parents and children. But, you know, to have that separate space so that women feel comfortable just, you know, and that the children aren't going to disrupt it. And then the other space that's actually part of the main space. And I'm very keen that there's the gap in the middle so that it's not completely separate. But that was what the survey kind of said. You know, there was no one view. It was that different women wanted different things, and that was what we did.
Did the men also get surveyed on that, just out of interest? I mean,
well, I think the implicit in the response, well, from various members of the client body, that they were in there anyway. Yeah.
And actually, as we said earlier, the upper space is probably the best space in the whole building because it is completely open to the main prayer hall. The best view as well.
Yeah, I have to say, when we first did it, it was going to be completely, it was going to have a screen over the whole thing. And gradually, through discussion, we managed to.
Yeah, so it is completely open, isn't it? That's the...
Yeah. There was going to be a screen. And then, you know, when the Mr. Beer screen was as you said, it started off by being a kind of 1.8 metre screen over the whole thing, and gradually, by asking questions and involving, you know, the survey and everything, we managed to kind of make it slightly less.
Are there any other questions specifically on issues around women and men in the mosque, or about worship and particular things around that? I wanted to ask, in Ramadan, does it get a very exciting place? I mean, does it feel like it comes alive even more than a normal Friday prayer?
So I think this is our first Ramadan since COVID. So I think when we first opened, it was just Ramadan. But then again, the community, not many people knew about the mosque apart from the local community. So it was busy, but not as busy as now. So I think our first sort of late night prayers were Friday night, and we were very busy. It's definitely a different atmosphere when it comes to Ramadan. It's a very spiritual time for Muslims. I think this is the first year that sort of we're able to actually practice it properly without sort of social distancing and temperature checks at the door and all these things that we had to do. So it'll be interesting to see sort of as you progress throughout the month. I think it gets more busier. So especially in the last sort of 10 days of the month, we're expecting it to be very busy. Yeah.
And you said that maybe women didn't go so much to the mosque in other mosques in Cambridge, but presumably you did you? I mean, does this have a sense, does the architecture add to the spirituality of the sense of the space?
Definitely. I think, as Julia mentioned, it's sort of a progression. So I think she detailed the different spaces sort of as you're entering the mosque, and that's something that you do feel each time that you come in. I actually grew up in London, but even then, even though there was a lot more mosques, we still didn't really go to the mosque when we were younger because there just wasn't space. So, I mean, since the mosque has been sort of created and me working there, obviously I am there all the time, but even if I wasn't working there, it'd definitely be a space that you'd go to. I think it's 100% just the fact that as I was mentioning, it's a purpose-built space for women. I think that's very innovative in the design, and definitely attracts a lot of mothers and children. Like even a lot of mothers who sort of homeschool children at home use the space throughout the day, just in the cafe, to sort of learn and teach children. But yeah.
I like that sense that it's in use kind of during the day. You said people coming who are working at home and coming. Other questions? I know we need to cover sustainability at some point, but yes, over there. Could you just say who you are?
Hi, my name's Joseph Lee, who I'm studying second year architecture at Central St Martin's. There's a few of us dotted around here today. I'd just like to say thank you so much for the presentation. I knew it was a beautiful building, but I didn't realise the care that went into the technological and environmental considerations that were so astute and added to the whole sense of the building as well. I'd just like to ask, touching on Cordoba and thinking about the Alhambra and Sofia and places like that, obviously these are structures that have lasted for centuries. What do you see the longevity of this building, and how do you prepare for that? How do you sort of, allow the next generation to take custody of this building? Do you see it lasting as long as these other spiritual places?
Well, I would hope so. I don't know that there's any reason why it shouldn't. You saw the Turkish mosque, which had a timber structure that has many centuries old, and unless if it's properly maintained, there's a kind of minimum of moving parts because we've got so the natural ventilation and the natural light. So, there obviously are things that can go wrong.
No, there are, but I guess that was the whole point of really investing in the building fabric. The height of the building as well. That itself just drives the whole ventilation system. We spoke about the actual fabric, the U-valleys, etc., and it's just built for longevity. And of course, you will need to replace building services, but for the most part, the building can look after itself, and you don't need the lights, don't need the heating and cooling. So I think that's the main point. It obviously has been designed for future climate change as well as most buildings are these days. Rainwater attenuation, that type of thing. But it is, definitely passive design is the way to go, and that's where we are with the scheme.
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think, in the past, the kind of design life of a building, people talk about 60 years. That's ridiculous. We shouldn't be designing buildings that have a design life of 60 years. We should be designing buildings that have a design life of, 200 years, maybe 600 years.
What's going to go first? Something's going to fail first.
Well,
what will it be?
It'll be the building services. Yeah.
Okay, we got it here.
It'll be the air source heat pumps, I'm sure.
Right. Was there another question? There. Yes.
Hi, I'm Carissa Turner I'm an architectural assistant from Squire and Partners. I wanted to go back to the kind of women in the Muslim community. The decision to include that larger space for women in the back, was that through kind of community engagement that you came to that decision, or was that kind of a preset already that you wanted to design a space that was more inclusive of that?
Well, we did want to design a space that was more inclusive. It was definitely the case that we wanted everyone to be in the same space. And then, only if people chose to would they go to the upper level, and, if they had children, they would go to the space at the back. So it was definitely about being inclusive right from the beginning. I would say the feminist in me says, we shouldn't even have that. That should be a scheme. But, I know I'm not supposed to say that. But, it's step by step. You can't do it all at once. I think it's a fantastic thing that the client was open to making these steps that are clearly...
I think even just sort of Islamically, historically, mosques are places for women. I think the only thing that sort of deters it in sort of a British mosque is the space. So in Islamic history, women have always been encouraged and actually would frequent the mosque maybe more often than men, because so I think there's a misconception in the fact that mosques are deliberately designed to not be accommodating to women and children. I think more so it's just the lack of space. So I think that's why I wanted to talk a lot about sort of how the fact that it was purpose-built really accommodated a lot of the community.
And can accommodate change, you know, because the Meshrabia screen can move, or, as I said, maybe be removed at some point.
So we had some questions from Mina Hasman, who is very strong on sustainability and was advertised as being here today. I'm going to slightly paraphrase. Tell me about biophilia, all that natural stuff. She didn't obviously say that. Tree-shaped columns, lovely gardens, timber, amazing natural light. Is that important? Do you think that makes a difference to the sense of the building? And has that been embraced by the community, perhaps for Saisha afterwards?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, the whole idea that was, you know, came from the client was it being kind of having a universality. So it's a universality, because, I mean, one thing we haven't mentioned actually is that it's non-denominational. And that was right from the beginning as well. So it welcomes all different types of Muslims. I mean, that was the point of me saying that they came from 60 different countries. I realised I didn't kind of complete that. But, I mean, that's an important point, particularly in Islam, that it is non-denominational. And now I've completely forgotten.
Biophilia.
I mean, I
Yeah,
suppose
kind of sense of natural
Yes.
materials. I
Yeah.
mean, you talked about it with Keith Critchlow and the pattern that
Yes.
you used. I
Yes.
forgot the name of it.
I mean, the gardens certainly help in terms of natural cooling. I mean, it's obviously set back from the roads, but you've got quite an expanse of gardens, really. So once those doors are open, you've got, you know, got some water, and it cools the air down. And it definitely helps. It's just having that growth all the way around the building.
But I was going to say that, you know, one of the reasons for using timber was that it's a natural material, and that is, you know, nature is universal, and it's a universal language. Then that was, you know, very much why we chose timber.
So Saisha, does it feel like a forest?
Yes. Yeah, I think one thing I always quote is the oasis within a grove of trees. That just captures it so well. I think it also just speaks to sort of, again, core Islamic concepts of being custodians of the earth. So I think it makes sort of people a lot more, in terms of worshippers, aware of our duty sort of to take care of the environment. I think it makes a lot of people a bit more considerate going about their day-to-day lives, sort of when you're immersed in a space that was created with all those elements sort of thought about. You can't not help but try and be a bit more sort of eco-conscious in your day-to-day life as well.
Certainly all need that. I think there's a question over there, and then we'll probably manage one more before we finish off.
Hi, I'm Pirada. I'm also from Central St. Martin's first year. I was wondering, how do you balance the elements between like the contemporary side of things and also the traditional Islamic side of things? Because as mentioned from the story, it's like the building, could it be more friendly and more approachable if it's more modern and contemporary rather than religious? So I was wondering, how do you balance those aspects while also be respectable to the culture?
Well, we definitely wanted to do a building of our time, and something that is contemporary, that didn't try and mimic what, you know, mosques had been in the past. And that's why it was so interesting when we found that, you know, mosques traditionally have always taken on the vernacular of their time and space, the place, and so it was really, that was the kind of starting point of trying to make it really fit in to be part of, you know, a British mosque in the 21st century in Cambridge. But also, I think what's quite important is the fact that this idea of the cultural bridge, because, you know, in looking at both British and English and Islamic sacred traditions and trying to do something that brought them together, was very much in our minds, something that is about, and I think that what I was really pleased when we got shortlisted for Stirling, because I think it gives a really strong message about cultural inclusion, because the first purpose-built mosque in the country was in Woking, actually, and I found out that that my great-grandfather was one of the trustees of it. So it was you know, you think of, you know, people maybe think of, you know, the growing Muslim population as something that's new. In fact, maybe the fact that it's growing is new, but the fact that the Muslim communities have been here for, you know, hundreds of years, actually. So it's, and I think that message is a very important message, that message of cultural inclusion.
I was reading about Muslim stonemasons bringing over some of the technology. I'm not sure if it's about the arches. I mean, you know, hundreds of years ago. I think it's a good point about, you know, is it right that tradition and contemporary is the kind of current thing with religious buildings? I'm not sure it is. I think that's just what those who are in architecture of this sort of bubble see. I think there's still quite a lot of traditional stuff going on that has no particular reference to contemporary. But I'm happy to be challenged on that. There was one other question. It's going to be the last question. Let's make it a really good one.
No pressure. Hi, I'm Kale Gilmore-Horley. So it's a sustainability question. So I'm quite curious. So you won the project in 2009 before we had all of the really lovely, very detailed sort of carbon zero plans that we have now. What kind of framework did you use? Was it instinct? Did you actually have metrics that you were trying to meet? Because you've now done what looked like from this very long distance, a detailed embodied carbon study. But I'm curious, how did you do it? How did you do it then? I know it's not that long ago, but we've come strides in the last decade.
Very good point, actually. So you say 2009. Okay, so yeah, we started working on it with you not that long after, I guess.
Yeah.
And I suppose we were just trying to make the most sustainable building that we could. I mean, you're right, there wasn't so many metrics then, it was building regulations. I guess you would always look at the London plan of that time, but actually it was just design the best we can, really. And things have moved on at a pace. And actually we have compared, you know, the building, the things that we've designed, our results to the LETI standards, and actually we're not that far off where we should be, the sort of certainly the 2030 standards. So, you know, I guess we were right. I mean, the decision not to have gas was a really good one. Timber as well. But it's just, you know, designing the best building we could, really, and using passive design principles, which, as you know, both of our practices, that's how we've always worked together. And I guess that's the result.
Really good instinct.
Yeah.
He totally missed the chance to say it was amazing foresight, didn't he? But yeah, there we go. Thank you very much. Building Stories will be back after the Easter break with a digital talk on the 26th of April, where we're going to get academic. We're going to be looking at the Dorothy Wadden building and the Central building at LSE. The next in-person event, so back here again in the Wren Room at Portland Place, is on the evening of the 17th of May. And we'll be taking you somewhere magic, where myth and history interweave. So that's it is really remarkable bridge, spanning cliff to cliff on the coast in Tintagel. It's got castles, it's got Arthur, it's got crazy bits of moving objects, places where there are no roads. That wasn't so exciting, but I mean, it is amazing. So book your tickets on the What's On page at architecture.com. Thanks again. Amazing, insightful contributions from Julia, Mark and Saisha. And goodbye from me. Do have a drink. And let's thank Woody.